The Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Blockchain Super Conference is coming to Dallas, Texas, February 16, 17, and 18 in 2018. If you know of a better way to get the latest insider knowledge about crypto, to hear directly from the top minds in this field, to interact personally with 800 fellow crypto lovers, hodlers, investors, miners, traders, developers, and founders, then I'd like to hear about it. If you don't, then you don't want to miss out. Register today for the Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Blockchain Super Conference. Go to bitcoinsuperconference.com and register today as a super early bird to get the lowest rates on tickets and hotel rooms. That's bitcoinsuperconference.com.
Welcome to Almost Here, Round the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies poised to transform our lives for better or worse are the focus of this podcast. Almost Here means these technologies are now here and starting to be used, or just around the corner, from Bitcoin to artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.
Good morning. This is Tracy Murda on behalf of Richard Jacobs here at Future Tech Podcast. Today I have an exciting guest. Paul Grassi is a Senior Standards and Technology Advisor at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. Thank you so much for joining me today, Paul. I appreciate it. How are you doing today?
Good morning. Thank you. I'm doing great. I appreciate you having me on.
So, Paul, let's jump in and talk about what actually is NIST. Tell me a little bit about the background, history, and how you became involved.
So NIST has been around for well over 100 years. I believe we were the National Bureau of Standards back in the day to, basically support standards and measurement science as a way to support and promote the economic security of the U.S. I think it was George Washington that was one of the first to say that without standards and without measurement, we really have no basis for a strong economy. So we do a lot of standards development. Our main role is in metrology, which is measurement science. So everything from, what is a kilogram to what time is it according to the atomic clock to information technology, which is where I participate. All
right. So what generally is or was the ultimate goal or the vision and mission for NIST?
Well, like I said, we're under Department of Commerce, so it is absolutely to promote economic security and promote commerce in the U.S. and frankly internationally. Even though we in the U.S. are still in the empirical measurement system, NIST is the actual agency that supports the metric system and does all sorts of measurements and measurement science around all sorts of technologies. Again, we're in nanotechnology, we're in fire prevention, material science, computer science, data science, nuclear. And as a matter of fact, we're doing things like clean energy and zero impact houses. We're all over the map in support of a strong, vibrant, standards-based economy. I mean, the example, one of the examples we all know, if we didn't have a common size for a car lug nut, we would really not have a very good competitive open market for, cars and tires. So we're happy to be part of this standards-based community. And while we are focused on U.S. economy and U.S. vibrance, we're very much invested in international standards.
So without getting too technical or too over my head, tell me a little bit about how NIST works to measure innovation.
So I'm in the Applied Cybersecurity division, so I can talk about it from that perspective.
Sure.
Obviously, every lab and every division is a little bit different, though, with the same, obviously, mission and goals therein. I would argue that you can't and shouldn't measure innovation. That should be something that's created in the market. What we should be doing is creating standards that don't prevent it, that don't keep innovation from occurring. So the way I measure if we're successful is if the market can thrive around our standards rather than be hindered because of something we've done in a standard.
What about some of the use cases you kind of mentioned, some of the different areas that you're working in? Can you give me some examples of what it is you're doing in those spaces?
Sure. So purely cybersecurity with a focus on identity and access management, digital identity primarily, not yet looking at completely looking at things like sovereign identity or refugee-based identity, but dabbling in that space, or at least providing the standards and guidance that could support that type of use case. But I'm focused primarily on identity. So what are the good guidelines we have to do and provide our stakeholders? And in the context of this call, what NIST does, our only real stakeholder, or actually I'd say the only entity that are subject to our guidance is the federal government, is the civilian agency. That said, from a stakeholder perspective, we've got public sector, private sector, and international, because again, we want to make sure that we aren't doing things that are special to the U.S. We want to make sure we're getting our solutions from the private sector, and we want to make sure that we can interoperate internationally. So our stakeholders are vast, but those that are subject to our requirements are only the federal government. We are a non-regulatory entity from that perspective. So we are focusing on strong identity proofing, which is a huge challenge in today's digital age. How do I prove that I am who I am online in order to achieve a benefit or service? That benefit could be anything from a financial benefit, maybe from Social Security, to health benefits if I'm a veteran, or student aid if I'm 18. And there's a real challenge there if you look at recent breaches that have occurred over the past couple of years. And I'm not just talking about the one that occurred a couple months ago. Our data is out there. It's in the hands of those that wish us harm, and we've got to create guidelines that prevent that from occurring and allowing the person that is the rightful owner of that information to be able to use it. We're also looking at authentication standards. We're looking at privacy standards. We're looking at how we can build these standards and have private-public partnerships so that the private sector will voluntarily adopt them and help build a vibrant ecosystem that supports this. So a lot of work to be done here in the world of identity and cybersecurity. So
in the course of your career, what have you seen as the biggest challenges to improving cybersecurity?
Well, this is, herein lies the fun that we have as an organization that is charged with measurement science. Measuring cybersecurity is extremely hard, and we haven't completely cracked the code on that one. And in the identity world, we haven't either. The example I use sometimes is, in biometrics, it's, fairly well known how to calculate a false match or a false non-match. You run, 1,000 people through a system. You test to see what happens when their biometric is read and matched, and you can calculate those metrics. So that's a good example of where metrology is working well in use cases like cybersecurity or law enforcement and border protection. It's really hard to know how secure a computer system is at any given state under any given context. You don't know what the criminals or the hackers know and have, and how they're going to use it, and how they are going to exploit it. In the identity proofing use case that I gave you earlier, you don't know what somebody can guess about you. You don't know what they have about you. So it's really hard to run tests to determine how strong a system is at preventing fraud. So that's something we are actively working on, and we are far from done with that, far from solving it.
What would you say, or what would you suggest are some ways that people can go about protecting their online identity? I mean, there's so many breaches, as we've talked about, but what are some ways that I guess are suggested or recommended?
It depends. I mean, in some respects, I think it's the job of the private sector, and to the extent that the government can convene and encourage the private sector from, following these practices. That could be one way. I know in the government, especially with what's occurred over the past couple of months, we're looking at ways to adopt better strategies to, identify individuals that need to have access to something. And I'm not talking about something scary like a national ID or some sort of tracking system. It's adopting processes and policies and technologies so that when that veteran shows up online to get access to something, we have a good way of proving that veteran is who they say they are, rather than a bad way so that somebody can fraudulently act on their behalf. So we certainly have a role as a government to help protect online identity and help protect personal data. Certainly, the end user has a role as well. But I would argue right now with the amount of data that's been breached and the amount of information that's just out there, it's not an easy problem for just a user to do with things like good cyber hygiene or changing your passwords all the time or making sure you have antivirus. I think this is going to be a coordinated effort. That said, I would argue that, especially being as part of the Department of Commerce, we want this to be market driven. So there are users that should demand certain things, for the lack of a better word, from the providers that they use online. As a citizen myself and as a consumer, if my doctor offers me online access to my health file and it's only protected with a password, I tell them no. That is not sufficient to me to protect that type of information. I want them to have multi-factor authentication there. We need a lot more of me to be able to do that. Another side of the house is starting to be a little bit more vigilant, if that's the right word, on what data we want to release and what data we should be releasing. We tend to over-release information in order to get access to a service as quickly as possible. We want, and we end up giving up way more than we need, and we have no idea what's going to happen with that data. So an example, again, of vigilance that happened to me, I happened to be coming out of the airport parking lot the other day. The machine ate my ticket. I went to the booth. The guy took down my driver's license and said, okay, I can see that you entered, 2 days ago and you're leaving now. That's going to be $20. Can I get your driver's license? Why do you need my driver's license? It's policy. No, you're not getting my driver's license. You didn't need it if I had my ticket. Why do you need it now? And it turns out he didn't. I paid and I left. It sounds a little annoying. It sounds a little bit pushy, but if we can start motivating and building momentum on that side and put less of our data out there because services don't require it, I think we'll be in a better place.
So tell me, Paul, are there new developments and projects that you are all working on at NIST that we should know about or that you could talk about at this stage?
Absolutely. We just released a new set of guidelines on digital identity. I think one of the exciting parts of that update, even though, again, it's not something I would expect a citizen to read. It's targeted at federal agencies delivering citizen services. But one of the elements in there is that, users, citizens, beneficiaries, because we do have non-citizens getting access to government benefits that need to and should. There's a lot of innovation on your mobile phone, for example, that can be used for things like strong authentication. Maybe agencies should be leveraging that rather than thinking they should be giving you something or issuing something to you, even if it's password. We now have biometrics on the phone, have secure storage on the phone. There's a lot of innovation that has occurred in the mobile market and in the authentication market writ large. FIDO Alliance, the Trusted Identity Online Alliance, where we are basically walking around with some of the strongest authentication technology in the market, and agencies should be leveraging that. I've said often we need to be in the business of acceptance, not the business of issuance. Agencies shouldn't think just because it's their system that they have to give the user something. The user already has something that's probably stronger than you would give them, so accept it.
Oh, yeah. So what are you doing, if anything, within the blockchain sphere, if you will?
Sure. A few things. So the NIST Cybersecurity program is certainly looking at it from a cryptographic perspective and, analyzing how it's how it functions in a secure fashion. And certainly we're looking at its applicability, or what are just the basic things you need to do to make sure that the blockchain is secure. We do that when any new innovation comes around. When it was big data, it was all about how can you secure these, unstructured databases like Hadoop. Same type of work on blockchain, plus looking at the underlying crypto. Myself, we are actually running a project at our National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which is essentially a model for strong public-private partnerships, where we have a privacy-enhancing identity solution, which is basically meant to blind providers from each other and protect user information and put user data in control of the user, not in control of the organizations that will use it. And that's leveraging blockchain technology to enable that. The good thing about the blockchain in this use case is it does afford us the ability to do things like triple blinding, which we had difficulty doing prior to blockchain. But from an overall identity perspective, some of the great things about blockchain are some of its scariest when it comes to identity. Immutable, out there forever, are two things that give me pause when I think about identity on a blockchain. And then, sometimes you get eye rolls when you say this, but in a post-quantum computing world, the crypto that underlies blockchain will be broken. So now I circle back to immutable and out there forever. If I put my personal information anywhere near a blockchain database, it'll be exposed in the future.
Okay. So where do you, just in what you know and what you've experienced, what do you think the future of that is?
I think it's still unknown. Certainly there are very valid use cases for blockchain that I, wouldn't feel comfortable commenting on because it's outside of my domain. And I remain an optimist, even as some of my peers remain pessimistic. I'm widely optimistic about our projects at the NCCOE. I think what's at the crux of this thing, if you pull back all of the buzzwords that I used earlier, like triple blind, the crux of this is giving users control of their data on their mobile device and only releasing it when they need to and want to the providers that they want to do business with, while at the same time not letting that user augment the underlying data, because it may be that data is derogatory. It may prevent them from opening a bank account. So we have to protect the integrity of that data as well. And I think that's a huge change in the market, where users' data doesn't live in the cloud, doesn't live centrally at somebody's data center. It lives on their phone to be released whenever they want. And I hope, and I believe, given some of the other things we're seeing in the market, that this is going to be around for a long time, and hopefully it will be part of our everyday lives here very shortly.
I agree, absolutely. Is there anything else in the space, either with blockchain or some of the other things that we talked on, or projects that you want to mention for listeners, just to sort of highlight what it is that you do or are doing?
We are constantly trying to evolve our guidelines or the material that we produce for our government stakeholders, and again, the broader stakeholder community that I mentioned. And we want to be responsive as possible to anyone in the market, which could include end users. So to some extent, I want our pipeline of work to be built by the stakeholder community rather than by me. I can't claim to know every interesting problem that needs to be solved, which is why we've got the NCCOE, which is why we've stood up GitHub pages and have a active social media presence, so that we can actually have a way to communicate in both directions with folks out there that care about cybersecurity, care about identity, care about whatever the underlying technology is. If it's not mine, I know where to forward it within NIST. So that's really what's important to me, is maintaining that active dialogue so that we're building material that matters most.
Absolutely. Well, Paul, I really appreciate you taking the time to share the information on NIST and what you're working on, and in some of your input just into, especially the blockchain things. If there's anyone who wants to know more information about NIST or reach out, what is the best way to reach you folks?
So you can always reach me directly. Again, I'm a civil servant, and my email should be known and leveraged. So that's PAG, Paul Andrew Grassi 3, the number 3 at NIST.gov. We have a website, NIST.gov/ITL. It's Information Technology Laboratory /TIG, Trusted Identity Group. And we also have a Twitter handle. It's Trusted, let me see here. Yes, Trusted IDs, IDS NIST, which is a good place to follow us. We're constantly posting there.
Excellent, Paul. Thank you so much for your time today. Again, for our listeners, this was Paul Grassi, the Senior Standards and Technology Advisor at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Paul, thank you again, and we look forward to following what you all do.
Great. Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful weekend, Paul.
You too.
Bye-bye.
The Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Blockchain Super Conference is coming to Dallas, Texas, February 16, 17, and 18 in 2018. If you know of a better way to get the latest insider knowledge about crypto, to hear directly from the top minds in this field, to interact personally with 800 fellow crypto lovers, hodlers, investors, miners, traders, developers, and founders, then I'd like to hear about it. If you don't, then you don't want to miss out. Register today for the Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Blockchain Super Conference. Go to bitcoinsuperconference.com and register today as a super early bird to get the lowest rates on tickets and hotel rooms. That's bitcoinsuperconference.com. You have been listening to Almost Here, Around the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Subscribe to this podcast, post a review to discover more future technologies that are poised to transform our lives for better or worse, such as Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.